Everyone wants to work in a place where they can feel safe. Companies that put care into health and safety have higher morale and fewer incidents. Employees stay longer in safe companies, leading to a more experienced and skilled workforce. What does a safe company look like? We can recognize these companies because they follow proven safety practices. These practices have been incorporated into the codes of conduct required by most customers. In this module, we'll explain the requirements often found in customer codes. To meet them and maintain a safe workplace, you'll need a health and safety management system. It helps you identify and control hazards, maintain compliance, prepare for emergencies, and continuously improve safety in your facility. There are 8 main aspects of health and safety in a code of conduct. Let's go through each one. First is occupational safety. Employees have a right to work in conditions that are free of known hazards. To manage risk, you need to identify, assess, and control every hazard in your facility. There are 5 ways to control hazards: elimination, substitution, engineering controls, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment, or PPE. Which do you think is the most effective? It's always best to eliminate a hazard through workplace design, like removing a tripping hazard. Similarly, substitution replaces a hazard with a safer alternative, like replacing a hazardous chemical with a less hazardous one. If you can't eliminate a hazard, set up engineering controls that minimize the risk to employees from the hazard. For example, ventilation, closed electrical panels, and machine shielding. Control the remaining hazards with administrative controls. Administrative controls are operational controls that include written safe work procedures, combined with training, signs, maintenance, and monitoring to make sure the procedures are being properly followed. If there are any hazards you can't fully control in these ways, give employees appropriate personal protective equipment, or PPE. For example, protective clothing, safety boots, gloves, goggles, face shields, and helmets. You'll need to train workers on where, when, and how to use the PPE, and have an inspection program to make sure employees are using it properly. Hazard controls combined with safe work procedures are the best way to create a safe facility. Let's look at an example where safe work procedures aren't being followed. Look at the picture and identify the violation of electrical safe work procedures. There are 3 violations of safe work procedures here: electrical, lockout-tagout, and fall hazards. Here are the main areas where you need to define safe work procedures. Let's go through some of the key requirements. Over the past few years, many factory buildings have collapsed. Each one of these tragedies could have been prevented. Regularly evaluate all buildings to ensure they're structurally sound. To prevent chemical injuries and accidents, you'll need a system to properly categorize, handle, store, and move them. Hazardous chemicals require special care. Control access and potential exposure with separate storage in appropriate cabinets, secondary containers, ventilation, and fire protection. Any elevated work areas can present fall hazards. There needs to be handrails and guardrails to prevent people from falling. Assess these areas for trip hazards. And anyone working at height needs to have fall protection equipment, like harnesses attached to safe anchor points. Control electrical hazards with regular inspections to find and fix issues, like damaged cords and exposed wiring, missing protective barriers, circuit panels with obstacles or combustibles nearby, and improper grounding. To prevent workers from being injured by vehicles, make sure any walkways are clearly marked. Wherever you can, install barriers that separate people from areas where vehicles operate. And before any industrial vehicle is used, it needs to be inspected. To reduce the risk of fire, keep combustible storage to a minimum, and make sure all areas have adequate smoke and heat detection and protection. Store any flammable or combustible liquids properly to make sure vapors don't accumulate, and keep ignition hazards like sparks and smoking away from any combustible materials. Confined spaces like tunnels and tanks can fill up with unbreathable, poisonous, or flammable gases. If workers go in unprepared, they can suffocate. The same can happen to the people trying to rescue them. Anyone working in confined spaces needs ventilation, air sensors, a dedicated air supply, rescue equipment, permits, training, and supervision. Hot work causes a lot of fires. Sparks scatter during hot work and smolder long after the job is done. That's why you'll need a hot work permit system. This system ensures that a fire watcher is posted to keep the area clear of flammables and stays at least 30 minutes after to make sure no fires start. When people are fixing equipment, it can easily start up by mistake, causing severe injuries. That's why lockout-tagout (LOTO) programs are essential. Employees need training and proper LOTO devices. There also needs to be special protection for pregnant and nursing mothers. In particular, they should never be working with toxic materials or required to do heavy lifting. Working mothers must also be provided a special place for breastfeeding. Governments require permits and inspections in some critical areas, like building and fire safety in construction projects. If these permits are missing or expired, it exposes your company to unsafe conditions and puts your operations at risk of being shut down. Check the occupational safety and health requirements to identify all the required permits, licenses, and reports, and put a process in place to regularly check that your permits, licenses, and records are valid and comprehensive. Industrial hygiene examines workers' potential exposure to chemical hazardous agents, biological agents, and physical agents. When you identify a hazard, assess the risk level and control it. Use engineering controls like exhaust ventilation and enclosures. Then apply administrative controls like job rotation to limit worker exposure. When you can't fully control the hazard, educate workers about it and have them use appropriate personal protective equipment. Review your factory to make sure you identify and assess all aspects of industrial hygiene. You'll need to have industrial hygiene testing reports, including sampling records, licenses, and permits to meet legal requirements. If you change a process that could trigger a health risk or introduce a new chemical, biological, or physical agent, then complete a risk assessment that includes occupational health. Emergencies can happen at any time. By preparing your facility and employees for such events, you can minimize the risk of injuries. Identify possible emergency situations and assess the risk: fire emergencies, chemical spills, explosions, earthquakes, and contagious disease risks. Reduce the risk by developing emergency plans and response procedures, including emergency reporting, employee notification, worker training, and evacuation drills, including night drills. Here are 6 of the key measures you need. Read through these measures before we see how they'd apply in emergency situations. We'll present an emergency, and you have 5 seconds to choose the measure that would help in that situation. When you're ready, click Begin. When an emergency happens, being prepared can make the difference between a minor incident and a major disaster. Prepare emergency response plans and post-emergency evaluation with reporting, root cause investigation, and preventive actions. In case there is an accident or near miss, you need to have procedures to report, respond to, and investigate the cause. That way you can meet any reporting requirements, manage the risk, and prevent it from happening again. Ask yourself, do employees know how to report an incident? Are there legal requirements for reporting? Do we have a formal procedure for investigating incidents and taking corrective actions to eliminate the root cause? Who will provide first aid for injured workers? Where's the medical facility? Who pays for workers' medical treatment, re-examination, and rehabilitation? How do you facilitate bringing workers back to work after injury? Remember, if a worker gets injured and can't do their job anymore, they cannot be fired. Instead, you need to find another position that they can do.